G'day friends and fans, welcome to Dave Talk Stuff, Ukraine War Update for the 26th of March 2026. Today we're discussing the proxy war. Now, you may not believe it, but NATO has an expansionist policy. Now, this is known as Article 10, and you may have actually heard them invoking Article 10 to fast-track Ukraine. Now, in the past, NATO has quietly expanded from its 12 founding members to 32, the last being Sweden in 2024. They call this the open door policy, but they claim to have membership standards involving political dialogue, reforms, military reforms, democratic reforms, and often have action plans. There are even YouTube videos on this, apparently. I haven't looked them all up. But apparently, these were all focused on post-Soviet states. First expansion wave was Greece and Turkey, and Western Germany and Spain. Then came the Cold War era, 1999 to 2009, post-Cold War era, where major expansion occurred in Eastern Europe, including Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, and the Baltic states. Then there was Montenegro, North Macedonia, Finland, and Sweden. Each expansion since 2009 has grated on relationships with Russia. Russia, at first, was powerless, right? They saw a violation of their economic and security interests. They saw the post-Cold War era as nothing but Russia bashing. And they tried everything. Trade, investment. Some Russians were doing well. In fact, some say too well. And yes, there were probably a few who got rich off the Soviet state, who fled to the West and slowly, sort of, but not to a great degree, repatriated enough to Russia to make up for the amount of state assets they plundered under the Soviet Union, where assets were bought at an extremely deflated value. Now, this pivots on the 2008 Budapest Summit Agreement. And many believe that Ukraine and Georgia were targeted since then. Now, there were no, according to Russia, this violates previous agreements, right? The neutrality of Ukraine, right? The neutrality of Georgia, the interference in Iranian affairs, all things that Russia points to as a proxy war against them. Europe hits back with its claim that it's a process and we pose no threat to any country. We're trying to build a free and united Europe. And of course their open door policy has seen nothing but a rising crime and a declining economy as increasingly more and more welfare seekers come to Europe. And not all of them from the Middle East or Africa. There were a lot in the early years, a lot came from Eastern Europe and Russia. Now, this, of course, has seen a slow and steady decline, and I believe that some of the reasons why Ukraine has had a recent... now, I don't know if it's 2.7 or 3.5, it depends who you ask, but that would be about, if you look at the ethnic breakup of Ukraine, you go from 70% down to 30%, And I would argue now that you would find many of these areas now 0 or less than 1% non-Ukrainian. I'm not saying they were all Russian. There's definitely been some Hungarians and Romanians. Now, apparently, if you follow this border here, it was cut off, right? This was actually, not sure if it was Hungary or Slovakia. Not sure exactly how it was altered. I don't have a Soviet-era map. There is a map somewhere on YouTube that shows you how the Soviet era redrew, and post-World War II redrew a lot of borders. And yeah, once upon a time, all this was, a lot of this was German territory. And then there was the Lithuanian Commonwealth. So you've had horizontal and vertical changes to the maps since about the birth. Now, sometimes you hear about the Grass Sea. I don't. This dates all the way back to Palrathia and that. A lot of these countries have had their names changed. Turkmenistan, that's where Turks come from, by the way. Yeah, so the colonizers over here, yeah, so every time they talk about decolonization, you know, they leave out Turkey. But yeah, once upon a time, this was a great empty land. Horsemen, traders, but yeah, the people of the land, the Palrathians, were pretty much driven off by the Mongols, and for a while the Silk Road was patrolled by various armies. It's changed hands and has left a psychological scar on Ukraine, because Ukraine was born out of Castle Kiev. It said the brunt of both expansionism from the east and west, and I suppose you would call it natural to want to side with the most prosperous rather than the closest neighbour. But Europe doesn't need the EU to be united. It does not need NATO. These are relics of the Cold War, just like the Warsaw Pact was a relic of the Cold War. And it wasn't a very well-meaning pact. It was a pact that served the governments, but it wasn't a pact that served the people. And a lot of people argue that NATO doesn't serve the people. But NATO spending's nowhere near what the Warsaw Pact spending was, which is why you had Poland undergo re-industrialization. And recently they have become a $1 trillion economy. I think they're like only the 13th in the world or something to achieve that. I know it's not much, but I know only the top third of the world are successful, and the other 2/3 rely on that success. And Ukraine is not at the top of the list. There are many African countries doing better than Ukraine. Kenya. So Ukraine, for corruption, still terrible. Ukraine for political reform, beggars beyond belief, terrible. Ukraine's constitution, so open to interpretation and abuse that Zelensky's turned the office of the president into a pretty much it's President Autopan. He just stands before government, tells them what he wants, and they all nod along. Or they get a visit from the State Security Bureau, the SBU. In fact, journalists are escorted everywhere by the SBU. Everything is cleared through British intelligence. I mean, allegedly, British intelligence runs Ukraine like a clearinghouse for operations against Russia. This goes back to the 2008 spying scandal where British intelligence managed to get, through nefarious means, they dropped the rock in, I believe it's Gorky Park, and they were spying on the what they call the walk. This is where leaders would meet in secluded parks and talk without fear of being recorded by the state. And what little they knew is that their frequency at such locations, they were being recorded by the British state. And apparently economic information was being fed to British companies to strategically isolate Russia in the open market, unfairly competing, one would say. Now, Britain denies this, but later it was actually British newspapers who broke the story, showing, yes, that they had put mini cameras into rocks and dropped them all over the park to listen to people's conversations. Even going so far as stationing a satellite at one point to relay information without the Americans being able to intercept. So it's not just a matter of trust, it's a matter of distrust all round. Whether you want Ukraine or not, I believe you have no right to it. I believe the people of Ukraine have been misled and pretty much sold on the idea that if they join the EU, they too could be $1 trillion country. And nobody's denying Ukraine's success. Russia has for years been trying to get Ukraine to deal with its corruption, but Ukraine keeps denying it. And now they blame Russia for it. Now, this is what offenders do. First they deny, then they attack you, claiming that you're just Ukophobe. You're just a Russian spy. And now then they play the victim. Oh, we were invaded, we're the victim. But ultimately they turn around and it turns out all along that they were the offender, right? And Ukraine has still stolen millions in aid, but now nobody wants to do anything because they can't be prosecuted because they're Ukrainian officials and it's Ukraine's problem to deal with. Because they don't like the Republican approach of just cut them off if they're corrupt. You know, remember Bill Clinton with all those African warlords. You never fix corruption if you're going to keep funding it. So this Bush, you've got to cut them off. There's no... Right? Yes, the people suffer, but the people have no power, right? The people of Ukraine have no power. Their vote doesn't matter because they don't get to vote. Zelensky was elected by a minority, but the majority were cut out of voting, and since then, the majority have left Ukraine. For not just Belarus or Russia or Moldavia, the vast majority have ended up further and further away. That's usually a sign that Ukraine itself is a traumatic experience. And for people to just openly be so single issue about this war, well, that's why it can't be solved, because you're all thinking, oh, but that's Ukraine's territory. Is it? Then Kosovo is Serbia's territory. because the maps said so. You gotta... I don't get herd mentality, so I'm not even going to try and break it down, because the people who have herd mentality don't like my videos. They have complete and utter cowardice. Okay, they are intellectually dishonest. Now, apparently, the Ukrainians have acknowledged that this territory here has fallen. It's very insignificant, but apparently the Russians are expanding this way. They're pressuring north of Kupiansk. Well, the map. One map says here, another map says here. It could be that there was fighting here earlier, and it still shows on other maps. BBC, BBC. According to the BBC, Russian fighting in Kupiansk is dying down. Well, yet according to Ukraine Pravda, it is heating up. I tend to think the Ukrainians, for all their propaganda, are at least sometimes saying, well, the Russians have advanced, and actually, where have they advanced today? Ambani. It's in the north of Kupiansk. It's north of Kupiansk. And that's it. That's all. Like, yesterday was only Shaknikli. Previously, there was Volochansk, Stanovia, and Salonitsky. These are small advances. Russia has changed tactics, and we'll get to those tactics shortly. But a change in tactics can signal either a growing frustration with the effort of the war, or as they switch back, if they're switching to a more defensive posture, it means they're getting ready to end the war. Right? They want to hold the territory they've got. So we'll see. While they still maintain an offensive posture in some areas. Now, they've also changed their grinding tactics. Now, as you can see, they admitted exactly is fallen. The Russians have gone past it, and they're pushing. Well, it says on some maps they're pushing towards Gaurivki. So, if this would be, are they pushing through here? Now they're going to be pushing here. So 1, 2, 3. Yeah, that's how the Russians usually operate. It's called the cauldron. It moves up and around, and then swallows the town. So we have action here as well, but not much. Okay, according to Telegram, the Russians are actually trying to cut off to northern Krominski, and that would make sense. Cut them off, and it's worked before. Cutting off, but it's going to be one hell of a big battle, and may eventually, and could. Every battle threatens to expand to a mass casualty event, which both sides are trying to prevent. Although Ukraine would gladly inflict lots of casualties on Russia, but they keep accusing Russia of human wave tactics. Well, no. They're using small unit tactics, not big wave tactics. We don't see thousands of men charging positions. But as we look around the map, no, there's very little movement elsewhere, and there's even suggestions that they could pull back in parts of Zaporozhye in a land trade. Whoops. But Ukraine is not interested. Right? Not this, not this, or not even this. They want 0.0, and that's the sticking point. They want to act like they've won the war. Now, Russian artillery is devastating. Ukrainian artillery is outdated. Ukrainian artillery is increasingly relying on Western artillery, of which is pretty similar. Russian and Ukrainian and French artillery are similar products. Both huge self-propelled harvesters. Now, both sides are not using hundreds or let alone dozens at a time. They are only using a small amount for a small time each engagement. But each time they do, it's devastating. There it is, 152. This is the latest model. I think it's a more. It's not just a larger barrel. This is last month. This is the last of last month's delivery, and these are the new prototypes that they are testing right now. They're still a 152, as opposed to the US 155, which has been made currently in Poland. Poland and France. There's two models. One is the Caesar, which is, I believe, the most common artillery piece. It's replacing the D20. Poland, of course, is phasing out the D20 for, I think it's the Crab 90. And as you can see, yeah, they put a cope cage on it, put a bit of cam net, and yeah, there's Koromiska. And it's devastated. And Koromiska is devastated. Now, I do not know if this is true or not, but according to some sources, Ukraine has requested, and companies in California are delaying maps and publications up to 14 days. So this could, in fact, be 14 days old, and you would never know it. Part of it is the office of the president wants delays on stories so that people do not know his current location, or when he's finished with a interview, not to pre-publish stories. Now, this is part paranoia, but it's not really Russia he's afraid of. It's the Ukrainian. I believe there's been genuine attempts on Zelensky's life from within Ukraine. But there's something here you may not notice immediately. And what have you noticed? That's right. His hair's not as thick. He's lost weight. He's sagging. He's no longer youthful. And he's graying. And he's no longer a big puff piece, is he? Which tends to believe what I said before about him being a CGI filter. Right? But this is the real Zelensky for some reason. Not very heroic. Rather dopey looking. Dope fish. That, now, Zelensky claims the US president is putting pressure on him to accept the Russian deal. Well, Russia has made it clear, and so has China, that they are going to put pressure, and so is India, going to put pressure on the US, right, to contain Europe, right, to contain European aggression, right? Now, everybody should be worried about Indian mass migration and as neo-colonialism, and as Chinese aggression in Africa as neo-colonialism, or Chinese aggression in Venezuela. Now, Venezuela has panicked Ukraine, and you think it shouldn't, but what happens is Ukraine was upset that the US could shock and awe Venezuela, but not help Ukraine. Now, Ukraine, they claim that the Americans have finalized these guarantees at the highest level, and that once Ukraine is ready to withdraw from Donbass, the next steps would be taken, not just for the security of Ukraine, but Europe as a whole. But Zelensky claims the US is focused on its conflict with Iran and not giving him the attention he needs. So, yeah, sour grapes all round. The Financial Times has said that, Trump told them to stop the killing or walk away, and he hasn't. He's obsessed with killing Russians. You've heard presidential decrees demanding the increased casualty rate. Like, you could just snap your fingers and kill more people. Just, oh, wonderful, 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 you know. Now, Ukraine's air defenses are degraded, but Russia says they've declined. Now, why are there troop transfers to the Middle East? Of course, Europe has taken some of its toys to the Middle East because it turns out that Ukraine can't provide the oil that it needs. Ukraine can't live up to the promises that it has made. And increasingly, the cost of Ukraine has even embarrassed so much that not how many times since in 2022, 2023, 2024, 2025, and February of 2026, almost every year the European Security Council has met, someone or multiple people have suggested Ursula von der Leyen stand down because she has failed in Ukraine. She has failed to deliver a stable energy policy, that the Green New Deal is a failure, that the Ukrainian deal is an economic disaster. And several generals have pointed out that if you put troops in, yes, that they're not worried about Putin, they're worried about Russia, because they believe that eventually Russia will start, once, if Russia continues to be effective in Ukraine, that they could rearm and invigorate the Chinese, and that they would be able to dominate a third of the hemisphere within a decade, aka Europe will be a minuscule mouse. And yet Ursula's policies of hostile engagement with America is effectively increasing the Chinese timetable. And many in Europe are worried that Ursula isn't the only one, otherwise she would be out. But it's basically the liberal faction of Europe is pretty much now almost openly Chinese, which is odd given that China's policy is to engage in a proxy war with Europe through Russia. China has called it rule from the shadows, right? That they will use their satellites, aka they thought they could use Venezuela, Cuba, India, Brazil and Iran to strategically pressure the rest to bring, and then slowly the BRICS countries to expand, with South Africa to swallow Angola, Kenya, Mozambique, and others, to basically debt trap. And Sri Lanka is almost at the point where it is controlled by China. Now, Russia, that's not what they intended for BRICS. BRICS was meant to be a unified protection of the what they called the global south, the bottom third, the pivot point of poverty and success, to shift the balance of global wealth. Of course, then wealth would flow through BRICS and therefore through Russia, and it would, in theory, balance the economy. But in practice, no. It would shift wealth, but those wealthy countries aren't going to turn around and pay African American wages. Or China. And if you've seen, there's deflation in China right now. Wages have fallen from an average of 9,000 to 6,000. They're barely above the poverty line, which I believe is around, with the current exchange rates, 4,800 yuan. Or yuan, actually, because they're digitalizing their currency now. Yay! So, this is important, right? Russia has leverage, and they're using it to get something, and that is, right, ties were frozen after the Ukraine conflict, but many have wanted a push called legislative diplomacy, which was a bipartisan thing where Americans, from Bill Clinton to George Bush to Nancy Pelosi and many others, have all been to Russia, all talked with Putin, but somehow it's okay when they do it because somehow they're trustworthy. This is the toxic relationship lawmakers have with the people, where instead of achieving, they tear others down for achieving. And this is why we have a strategic imbalance in Ukraine. The strategic balance in Ukraine was to have a neutral state that would facilitate trade between the two without being a logistical nightmare, that trucks from Europe could go through Ukraine into Russia and vice versa without having to... Belarus didn't have the infrastructure, is pretty much too cold for most of the year, can't keep its roads open. If Belarus had stepped up, no one would care about Ukraine. And I think this is increasingly something that Putin and others, and again, it also comes down to strategic positioning, is that the gas flow come through Hungary and Slovakia. So, again, Belarus, too expensive for the pipeline. Ukraine thought it was the natural, guaranteed 100%. You have no choice. You've got to pay our rates. And this is what it's all about. Ukraine's greed. And if Zelensky weren't in power, I reckon it would be someone else. I do not think Zelensky makes a decision without at least 3 phone calls. Now, the West may end its policy of expansion at any time. This is Article 10 of the Ukraine NATO Charter. And Russia is capable of stopping anyway. Orban's thinking is that this was from the Budapest summit, that there was an idea that Ukraine should be a member of NATO. It was a strategic position. 6 minutes to Moscow would put strategic pressure on the Russians not to force them to back down on every global issue. But as people said, why didn't they do it? Why are they so reluctant? It's because they believe Russia is strong enough to stop NATO expansion. And that there's even a fear that some Baltic states would revert back to Russia unless they, or strategic isolation, Finland, always with its obsession with the past. People getting sick and tired of Finland going, what about Russia? Every European meeting, everybody's sick of this glory days. Well, we defeated Russia in the Winter War. We can do it again. It's a different time, different nation, different attitudes. And we all know half the Finns would immediately flee to Sweden like they did last time. And, of course, the only thing that... it was actually what stopped the Russians in Finland was the fear that the Germans were going to attack on their flanks. And, of course, never mind the several thousand Swedes and the threat that once the Baltic Sea was open, they'd have British warships off their coast. So, really, Finland, you didn't win anything. You surrendered the land anyway. You didn't win. You halted them and then gave the Russians everything they wanted in the first place. So, millions died for nothing. Could have actually lost less land or, could have negotiated better. But no, everybody it seems to be in a race to pull the trigger. Now, many believe that Russia is strong enough to stop NATO expansion, but China's the one reluctant to, and India are both reluctant to engage militarily with the West because it would destroy their own plans. But if there was a genuine threat, if NATO posed a genuine threat, I think things would be different. But NATO doesn't pose a threat to India right now. So India continues its games of ambiguity. Same with China, same with the US, and, somewhat political ambiguity as well, where you just take the position of the most advantageous of the day. If you sell out Sri Lanka to benefit India and it will get you cheaper gas, you do it. Right? It's like how they sacrificed Enron, ignoring the billions that India owed Enron, right? Enron collapsed primarily because Kenneth Lay thought the government was going to bail them out because India wasn't going to pay its debts. The Californian energy deal was the free market. They thought they would side with the free market. But it wasn't a free market. It was people increasingly saw that the market was being manipulated and wanted regulators to step in. And California was all too happy to allow Enron to drive up the prices during peak times. And of course, it cost when it cost them politically, they turned around and said, "No, we're going to throw Enron to the wolves as revenge." So don't think that it was just Kenneth Lay. There were many moving parts in Enron, as just like there's many moving parts in Ukraine. Trump was trying to simplify, expedite, and eventually bring to the point where if you're looking at the Finnish conflict in hindsight, and many other conflicts in hindsight, you would go, you know what, if we finished World War II in 1943 and Germany collapsed anyway, then millions of lives were spared. Unfortunately, the people think it was worth the 80 million dead and the complete and utter destruction. Because why? Because they want their collectivism, right? Germany didn't give them the gave them the security blanket they wanted, but didn't give them the personal autonomy they wanted. Liberals are hypocrites. They're ambiguous. They only want they don't want what's best or what's right. They want what's satisfying in the moment. And that's why they cannot resolve Ukraine. Because there is no benefit to ending the war. Because when the war ends, they run out of victims to pamper, to, NGOs exist to serve NGOs, so they need victims. And NGOs are the biggest lobby groups right now. They are all trying to get rid of Trump to get back to the glory days of trillion-dollar aid packages. Well, not just to individuals. I'm talking about, 10, 20 years, over billion, how much, 12 trillion US dollars has been spent on aid. About 10 on military assistance packages. And about another 12 on entitlements for people who shouldn't be collecting them. To de-escalate Ukraine should be their top priority. And the ending of the proxy war. Many people believe it's a proxy war. That it's a proxy war that's been going on against the Russia since 2008, 2009. NATO, I can argue its enlargement process poses no threat. But you were told when Putin came to office, if you're no threat, if you're no threat to Russia and Russia's no threat to you, let us in NATO. And that he called them out, and since then, you've had Western support for Ukraine since 2000, since 91. The West has gone into Ukraine with military intelligence, weapons training, transferring locals to foreign training, pretty much setting up shop opposite to Russian businesses and taking business off Russians. It's been subsidized. While they avoid a direct scale, full-scale military conflict, they have escalated Ukraine. Now, I almost forgot. Russia has shifted its conflict strategy. If you notice, this week, drones were around 1 to 200 every day. No large-scale attack of hundreds. Russia has, according to Ukrainian intelligence, Russia is only using 40% of its drone capacity, which means the other lot are being stockpiled and some are going to Iran. Yes, recently there was a ship, allegedly a smuggler, a Russian smuggling operation sunk by Israel. Israel has actually threatened Russia, by the way, that if they retaliate, that they would execute every Russian leader. Allegedly. This is now, Ukrainian intelligence has been known to exaggerate and lie, and so has Israel. But Israel has increasingly hiding behind US skirt to be very bold. Now, again, it takes a lot of study and a lot of time to figure it out. And if you cannot accept my word that Iran started this conflict, that's okay. That's on you. If you cannot believe that Ukraine started this conflict, that's on you, not me. Ukrainian supporters just won't accept it. That's why they won't come watch my channel. They don't want the truth. And more and more people don't want the truth. They are increasingly stubborn, thinking that all you have to do is comfort yourself and eventually everything will go your way. I don't know where you get this belief from, because facts don't change. You can change, you can race swap Cleopatra, but eventually everybody will just hate you. Your lies will, your lies over Ukraine won't win in the end. Okay, more and more Europe is shifting to the right, and the more the liberal establishment supports Ukraine, the more political backlash there is. People are walking away, not just from women, predominantly liberal women, because of their utter sheer stupidity, sheer hypocrisy. They can't be told. They don't need no man. And then when you don't need them, when you won't support them, they freak out. And so people are just sick of it, sick and tired of the gaslighting, sick and tired of toxic behavior. And this is what's driving Ukraine, is this toxic entitlement. And I think it comes from the fact that Ukraine has always been the land between, right? It's always been a trade hub, a point. But more and more that's been shifting to Crimea, and overland routes are getting less and less important. And if you look at it, you could, instead of lots of trucks coming from France and Italy and Germany in through Hungary and into Ukraine and Russia, right? Russia, and this is actually China's building. Russia wanted to build rail lines. Germany wanted to build rail lines, remember, from the middle. But again, this is more about control, right? Increasingly, people notice that there are people who want to control the world. Stock markets, corporations, banks. They don't want you to have autonomy. They want you to fall in line with their interests. And that is why why Ukraine is a proxy war. It's about European interests, not about Ukraine's interests or Russia's interests. And Russia wants Ukraine to be neutral, not ruled by Russia. Just go back to the 1991 neutrality agreement. Even Ukraine can't accept that. Why? Because Zelensky wants an EU job. Well, emigrate to EU. I'm sure Poland will have you. But no, this is the problem. Right? Someone sets policy and sets about selling you this glorious utopia, and like so many either emotional or low IQ people, the majority just seem to go along with it without questioning the narrative. And again, that's what I notice a lot with my viewers, is that you are people who question narrative and do not believe things, even if I say it. But again, I think there's enough evidence out there that Ukraine should be neutral. It's called the strategic land bridge approach. And if Ukraine had not been greedy about the continental pipeline, there'd be no Nord Stream. $40 billion would have flowed through Ukraine a month in gas and oil, and Ukraine would be prosperous. Not wealthy, but again, it's not enough. And again, I don't think it's Zelensky. I think this time it's the people behind him who are pulling the invisible puppeteers, the banks who always want more, the billionaires who always want more, the women behind it all, right? The billionaire lifestyle, the 100,000 plus women who fly to Davros every year want more. So that's where and why Ukraine is going to be so difficult to end. Now, thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. Please support the channel. You support me on Ko-Fi, Patreon, buy my books, buy my merch. I appreciate each and every one of you. See you in the next video, and bye for now.